Yo, I'm Matt.
And I'm Joel.
And we're FringeCraft. Today we're going to be watching a video, What Got Robert Bigelow Interested in UFOs?
This is from episode 1612 of the Joe Rogan Experience that just came out February 25th, which is 2 days ago. We thought this was interesting because we just covered Robert Bigelow in our last week's episode, and now he's showing up on a mainstream podcast, so we thought we'd cover him again.
Yeah, well, how synchronistic.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we're on a common strand.
Yeah. Before we get into the video, we'd just like to ask you to like this if you like this kind of content, subscribe to see more videos by us, and comment what you think about Robert Bigelow or just about the video. So let's get into the video starting now.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
You and I have some shared interests, clearly, in the world of UFOs, but I want to talk. Most people know of you because of Bigelow Aerospace. They know that you're this billionaire investor and you're a very successful businessman, but you have a deep fascination with UFOs.
Yeah, sure do.
How did this all get started?
Back when when I was about 3 years old, which would be about 1947, and actually in May of that year, my grandparents had a very close encounter. It was dramatic, and they were taking an evening drive in the late afternoon up into the mountains and coming on back down to Las Vegas, and they saw what appeared to be at first an airplane on fire, and the object became closer and closer to them, and they pulled off to the side of the road, and at one point then it filled up the windshield, and they thought they were going to die. And at the last second, it shot off and disappeared. And I learned of this story when I was probably 10 years old, and because I was 3 at the time, and my mother had told me this story. So I approached my grandfather, and he wouldn't talk about it. Now, after all these years, like 7 years have gone by, because I was intrigued with it. And so I went to my grandmother, and she only would say a few words, but she wouldn't talk. So I got the story from my mom, and my grandfather had to sit on the side of the road there in the car for a while to recompose himself, and because they thought they were going to die, and then he finally was able to drive on back to Las Vegas. So that was the beginning for me.
Did he ever describe what you said? It looked like a plane on fire, but like, what was the shape of it as it got closer?
I don't recall any kind of shape that my mother described. I don't recall that.
But they just knew it wasn't a plane. They knew it was something.
That's right.
Something
That's right.
Crazy.
So in the family, the family had an event, and I lived right next door to my grandparents, and the family had an event that kind of started things at that date. For me, other personal things came later, but for the family, that was a big deal.
So, first of all, I think we can gather that it was probably a bright object, that it was possibly orange or red, because if they thought it was on fire.
Yeah.
So, he wasn't super descriptive, but we can gather that much from it.
That was a bizarre story.
Yeah. And another thing that, I brought this up in the video that we originally covered him in, is that it's taking place in Las Vegas, which is, I suppose...
Yeah, near where all that stuff gets tested.
Yeah. So...
Or they're actually outside Las Vegas. So it was just his 2 grandparents, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't in the car. Yeah. It's so weird that, like, it's just some personal experience that got him into UFOs.
Yeah.
And now he's a billionaire UFO
like
investigator.
His family member's personal experience, and that it drove this fascination, seemingly from a very young age, too.
Yeah, 10 years old.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going.
Okay.
So this was, you said 47?
47.
And 47 was the time of the Roswell crash. 47 was a time there was a lot of UFO activity being observed worldwide. And the speculation is that this had to do with the nuclear bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all the tests that the United States had done and Russia had done, and that there was a lot of interest in obviously in that. Well, actually, Russia hadn't dropped any bombs by that time, right?
Right.
It was after that, but that there was interest in our species by extraterrestrials because they let, oh, these crazy assholes are detonating nukes. Like, let's go take a look at them.
Right. Well, you had so-called Foo Fighters during the war. These lights that were following bombers, and the tail gunners were the ones that saw them most often, of course, and that happened through the war, and then of course Roswell. But before that was Ken Arnold, right? In about June-ish, and then in July 8th was Roswell.
And there's a direct uptick though from the Trinity experiments, right?
I think I gather my feeling simply is that without any kind of other evidence or proof that was a huge stimulus. Yeah.
So this was around that time, and you had heard about this as a part of, family discussions.
Right.
And so that sort of ignited the fire initially.
Yeah. And I started asking my friends, as I say, when I was about 10, have you any reports in your family of anything? And by golly, a couple of my close friends told me things that they had never told me before. So, that wasn't necessarily an exclusive event, is what I'm saying. Other people in Las Vegas had seen things at close proximity as well.
Now, your relationship to this is obviously something that you've carried for so long. It's been an obsession of yours for so long.
Yeah.
It started with this, but what personal experiences, if any, have you had?
Well, when I was probably 7 or 8, I used to have what I chalked up all my life to just being silly dreams. And I had maybe 5 or 6 of these dreams, and I could never make sense of them. And I would be laying in bed on my side, and typical dream, always the same. There would be 3 short somethings in a kind of monk robe, and so I couldn't see any face, couldn't see any appendages, and these 3 whatevers were standing there, and they were not too far from my eye level as far as the heights and so forth.
So these like child size?
Yeah. And so there was nothing I was an avid comic book reader, but there was nothing in the whole genre of comic books that related to that, or movies. And we didn't have television in Las Vegas till 53 or 54, and even after that it was terrible broadcasting, at first. But so it made no sense to me. And so over my lifetime, I never mentioned it to anybody, including my wife. It's funny how you keep things secret, and just kind of for no good reason. Maybe I would be embarrassed to talk about it. But I finally thought, well, maybe it was just dreams. Maybe it was something else. And so that was the first event personally that I had at that time in the subject.
When did you start to connect the idea of these tiny people or human-like things with extraterrestrials?
Well, years later, when I began to start my process as a researcher and as a student in the subject, and began to talk with people who made it their business to be experts in abductions, and the more I got into the field and sat writing out questions for the researcher, for the therapist who would be asking the questions, and I'd be sitting there watching the process. And just over time, I thought, well, maybe there was something more to it, but I'm better off not knowing anything, so I'll just walk it off and forget about it.
A personal experience seems hard to connect with.
Yeah.
Because it's so intangible. I mean, maybe to him, I have dreams that are weird all the time, but they usually don't have long-lasting meaning to me.
Yeah, to the point where you dedicate much of your wealth and
Yeah.
efforts to.
So that was a surprisingly weak.
Yeah. It doesn't
connection.
seem like he's had some kind of personal, extremely strong experience, though he may be underselling how powerful to his grandparents.
Well, he's
this-
also he's saying how young when he was a young child. I'm sure at this point, at this age, since he had Skinwalker Ranch and all that, right? So
Yeah.
I'm sure he's got tons of experiences now to share. But
at least very varied kind of paranormal experiences. Maybe they're not all even connected directly to UFOs or aliens, but Skinwalker Ranch is known for just strange happenings.
yeah, he seems so different in this interview than in the one from the 60 Minutes interview, where he seems a lot more intense.
Well, he's not being questioned in the same vein where
Yeah,
it's
that's
like
true.
she's
You know
almost
you're
like
crazy,
looking
right?
down on him. Yeah, exactly. It's like he's looked at as like almost like a hero,
Yeah.
Joe Rogan's looking at him like, this guy's admirable for dedicating this much wealth to
His passion.
furthering
really,
furthering his knowledge of
I mean,
UFOs and
I think of
UAPs
this
and-
as like where real science is done. Is through people like him,
yeah.
and he's funding a lot of studies on consciousness too, not just UFOs. So I assume they're related to him in some way. If he's talking about how his dream
affected him so much.
affected him so much.
Definitely. And I mean, consciousness is something that it's like we have no clue really how consciousness works. Neuroscience is still generally lacking in explaining our experience as a human, right? So
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And like your experience can change so much over time too, even if you're in the same the same spot.
Yeah.
It's the next day, you're at your computer the next day and everything's totally different in how your experience.
how you
is.
consciously perceive it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's crazy. All right, well let's finish the video up.
for sure.
Yeah, we talked last night about John Mack a little bit, the Harvard.
A great guy.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
he did a lot of these sort of hypnotic regression sessions with people where they describe very similar scenarios.
A multitude of different situations. The abduction phenomena was very proliferate in the population. It seemed like even we did a survey called the Roper Poll, and we repeated it 3 times so that the margin of error was really reduced to like 1.5%. And abduction researchers came up with the 10 questions, and so we distributed that, and the conclusion was a fairly relatively sizable percentage of the population had some kind of experiences, according to them, according to the researchers, and according to the poll. I am not qualified to speak to the accuracy of whether the questions were that relevant to the conclusions or not, but that's what they said. And I had in my own research found people that I put them through regression, not personally, but I found a hypnotherapist that could do that, and I found a number of people just here, there, scattered around, maybe somebody in my own staff, and they would come up with these stories and these events.
One of the criticisms of John Mack and hypnotic regression in general is that the idea that you can put a memory into someone's head, that you could suggest things and you could create false memories. And this was something that I've read in the criticism of his work, that this style of hypnotic regression and bringing up these very specific scenarios to a bunch of different people, you can sort of help create, especially in people that are easily influenced or people that are open to suggestion, you could put these false memories in their head. And so, you know, especially when you're dealing with something as fantastic as a
Right.
UFO or
Right.
alien abduction or visitation or something like
Right.
that.
Oh, that's definitely possible. There's also something called screen memory, but dealing with the power suggestion. That's absolutely true. But my experience was with different hypnotherapists, they went out of their way. In fact, maybe if they did make a suggestion, it was just the opposite. They might say, okay, you're on board this craft. You know, where's the lighting coming from? Is it coming from the corner or of the room that you're in? Well, there were no corners, and they'd be corrected right away by the person being hypnotized. And so they went just the opposite direction on purpose to make suggestions to maybe coax the person to come that direction, and they wouldn't do it. The person wouldn't do it. Now, screen memory is different. Supposedly, if somebody has a very close encounter with supposedly somebody that's ET, you leave that the memory turns out to be entirely different, and that's put into you consciously, and you recall something entirely different than what actually happened. Maybe you saw two deer on the road, or
Right.
something of that sort.
Sounds like
or maybe there were owls or whatever.
The Men in Black.
So,
Neuralizer.
that's what's
Yeah. That's what it sounds
Catch
like.
new episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience.
Well,
So, you know, you brought up the neuralizer, and
from Men in Black.
yeah, I suppose, yeah, which is exactly, you know, we were talking about deep state. That's the prime example of like a deep state organization that people have at least probably heard of. But I think Joe Rogan has a good point there when he's pointing out that, you know, these suggestions can be persuasive and influential on people's memories and minds and in their stories. But I do remember that there were those 10 questions that were asked.
Yeah, we covered that
Yeah,
in our last video.
exactly. And like one of the questions I remember seeing was, does the phrase or
Trondor or
word
something.
Trondat
Yeah.
mean anything to you? And like if it did, they were immediately disqualified because
Yeah,
it's
so-
just like a fake.
They had controls in there to try, I mean, and I don't know that it's perfect, you know, but to try to counter that. You know,
Yeah.
people who are influenced or they just want to seem interesting,
Exactly.
you know, who will say anything to seem interesting, those people are filtered out through tricks like that. But I mean, I'm sure it's not perfect. I don't know. I mean, I honestly, I believe there are people who have these types of experiences. Like we saw in our Calaris video, we saw people with wounds.
Yeah, didn't someone even
From-
die?
Yeah, someone even died. They had all those burn marks and stuff. Like
The whole community.
I mean, I believe there's a reality to these experiences. At least in some cases. Now, do some people lie to seem interesting? I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure they do.
And, you know, whether the reality is extraterrestrial or interdimensional or something spiritual or whatever, we're not positive. But there's definitely more to it than what science is giving us the answers for, like modern day science that, you know, I think probably science generally denies that.
Well,
Academics maybe deny that there's,
there's no evidence of that.
yeah. So,
There's no... I don't know what evidence would be besides a fragment of a ship or something.
yeah, you'd have to have direct. I just bringing up that Elon Musk interview. I think his direct evidence that he was saying is you'd have to have something like directly, maybe in a time period. You'd have to have some kind of material, like found amongst you know, in an archaeological dig that isn't representative of that time period. So if you found like titanium buried somewhere,
Anachronistic? That's what they call it?
I think so. Like something that is completely out of what they would have been able to develop. Something that, you know, even is more modern. Like titanium, I think, requires like special techniques and
Yeah.
has taken time to develop even how to make it.
I mean, some of the craftsmanship that's supposedly ancient, done with chisels or whatever, to me it seems impossible. So I mean, like if you watch the Uncharted X channel or something like that. But I guess some people will see that as evidence, and some people will see it as like, you see what you want to see out of it. I just don't think most of that was done with chisels.
Yeah, well, I mean, like ancient Egyptian stories are saying, yeah, Egypt is this old, like way older than what our academics are saying it is, and then, some of the evidence seems to discredit what modern academia says is the story.
They just don't acknowledge it. But
Yeah.
They call it a fringe theory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it would seem that like maybe there's more to these quote unquote myths, like Egyptian myths, than
I would agree with that. I mean, we should take them at their word and then see from there.
yeah, exactly. All right, well, I think that was a really interesting video on what got Robert Bigelow interested in UFOs. And if you have any comments, anything that you think that we haven't brought up, let us know in the comments. Like this video, and please subscribe.
Oh, and let us know what got you guys interested in UFOs as well.
Yeah, definitely. And other fringe material, because, some people who might watch this might enjoy conspiracy, but are maybe, like, not so...
Paranormal?
Yeah, paranormal things are interesting, but they're not into conspiracy or whatever. So, what got you into this? All right, well, I've been Matt.
I'm Joel.
And we're FringeCraft. Later.
See you guys.